We are in this for the long haul. Even when Al-Qaeda is dealt with, the job is not over.
2001, and a promise for a nation and a clear directive for a mission.
We have set the objectives to eradicate Osama bin Laden's network of terror and to take action against the Taliban regime that is sponsoring him.
This was a war which would swell. At its peak, 130,000 troops from 50 nations, including 9,500 from the UK. A mission that would cost Britain £2 billion and the lives of 456 service personnel. Of course, the Afghan lives lost, countless. Initially, this was a war waged in response to an atrocity by a terrorist group who were given safe haven in these lands. Military commanders from that time claimed success, and now betrayal.
The mission of preventing it becoming a safe haven has been achieved for 20 years. There were never attacks launched on any scale like that from Afghanistan against the West. But now that is all gone, it's dissolving. Won't have been in vain, but it has now been betrayed. And Afghanistan will again become a major threat to us.
The road to withdrawal has been a long one, but the commitment has always been that what would be left was a nation able to defend itself. A commitment by a Prime Minister in 2011.
Having taken such a huge share of the burden and having performed so magnificently for a decade, the country needs to know that there is an end point to the level of our current commitment and to our combat operations. But this decision is not only right for Britain, it is right for Afghanistan too.
A commitment reiterated by a president in 2013.
We must give Afghanistan the opportunity to stabilize. Otherwise, our gains could be lost, and Al-Qaeda could establish itself once more. And as Commander-in-Chief, I refuse to let that happen.
So the question, with billions spent to create and train Afghan security forces, why has the situation deteriorated so dramatically, so quickly?
What we got to the point of was having 10,000 troops enabling 380,000, nearly 400,000 Afghan National Army and police. But we'd done it by teaching them how to fight our way, fighting light, moving fast, relying on air support and air cover. Now that's great when we were alongside them because we were able to provide the helicopters, our contractors were able to service those helicopters and make sure that they were supplied and that they had the air support, the air power that backed them up. But when we pulled out the contractors, we neutered the helicopters, we ended the logistics chains, and effectively we changed the way that they had to fight. And it's absolutely heartbreaking because it didn't need to be so. It's unnecessary.
For President Biden, he says the cost of remaining in Afghanistan is too high. His critics say it's a pittance.
We've not been in combat operations in Afghanistan since 2016. We could have remained in Afghanistan providing light support almost indefinitely in the way that the United States remains in Germany and Japan to this day. With a relatively limited amount of support from the West, we were able to secure improvements in millions of lives. And by departing in this reckless fashion, we are going to leave chaos, horror.
The presidential hope was that this would be the end of a war which has lasted 2 decades. The fear, it will now evolve into a humanitarian crisis that could last decades more.
I've been speaking with Sir William Patey, former British ambassador to Afghanistan. I started by asking him for his thoughts on what's happening in the country right now.
It's an own goal. This didn't need to be like this, but the decision to precipitately withdraw troops has produced a crisis of confidence in Afghanistan, which we're now seeing the consequences of that.
But does that mean that we are merely the tail to America's dog?
Well, it was unsustainable for NATO troops to stay without the American core. There were 3,500 American troops and there were around 5,000 NATO troops, but they all came around an American-led NATO command.
The cost has been appalling. I mean, we're talking about over 440 British deaths, and we're talking about over £30 billion of British money. Was it all in vain?
Well, I don't think it was in vain. I think we've rather lost the plot. You remember we originally went in to remove Al-Qaeda, who had perpetrated the downing of the Twin Towers in New York. So that was the original goal, to remove terrorist bases. Then, given that we had overthrown the government, to build up a stable, democratic Afghanistan. We spent 20 years working on that. I just don't think we had the patience for it. You can't turn a country like Afghanistan into a secure, stable democracy in 20 years. You have to have a longer-term commitment. I think our failure was that we didn't deal with corruption as quickly as we should have. That should have been the fundamental building block of Afghanistan, an independent, strong anti-corruption mechanism that before anything else was done, I think we were a bit complacent on that.
Well, what are we to say of what we've done?
I don't think we can hold our heads up. I've almost been in tears listening to my former colleagues in Afghanistan, women, Fawzia Kofi, others, who've had 20 years of girls' education, university education, of working, who are, prominent advocates of a bright future for Afghanistan. They now live in fear, and it's appalling to sit here in our comfort in London and think about what they are going through now. It's truly appalling.
I'm just wondering how you, as an ambassador, a diplomat, somebody who'd kind of, lived a life which really dealt with the rule of law and with diplomacy and all that, to what extent you feel haunted now by what has happened in the country that you loved and you tried to serve?
Well, I fear what's going to happen to it now. I still had hope some time ago. I had hope last year that we could sustain a commitment. I fear the turning point was the agreement the American reached with the Taliban in Doha, which was essentially all about withdrawing American troops and said nothing about the future political settlement. They basically sold the Afghan government down the river. And that was the turning point under the Trump administration. And I think the Biden administration has just continued that policy on, because I think we could have supported the Afghan people and given them time to evolve into their own form of democracy, their own form of government. And we could have reduced the amount, once our troops left, the amount of money we were pouring into the country also reduced. And that in itself was a good thing.
Ambassador Patey, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
My pleasure.